right, go ahead. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Var Valley after some hiatus. Today, we're joined by Emmet Sweeney and also Jacob Berman from History Valley, because we're going to tackle a very difficult subject today when it pertains to chronology. Is Muhammad a historical figure, and is the Rashidun Caliphate indeed fictitious? And we're going to be talking again with Emmet Sweeney, and he's going to piggyback it off of the chronology issues outlined by Herbert Illig and also by Gunnar Heinsohn. So if you'd like to go ahead and just take it away, Emmet, we'll get started. Jacob, thanks again for joining us today.
All right, thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
The question of Muhammad's existence and the history of Islam in general hinges on from my point of view anyway, hinges on the question of whether these centuries, some of the centuries in the first millennium, are fictitious. Now, according to Gunnar Heinsohn and according to Herbert Illig and various other researchers, several centuries of the first millennium are in fact fictional and were created, fashioned and fabricated, if you like, around the 10th, or what we call the 10th or 11th or 12th centuries, for political and ideological reasons. Now, one of the arguments used against Gunnar Heinsohn and Herbert Illig was Islamic history and chronology. The argument being, early Islam is supposed to have arisen right in the middle of these dark centuries, these fictitious, allegedly fictitious centuries. And why would the Muslims who, date their calendar from the Hijrah, the journey of Muhammad from the flight of Muhammad from Mecca to Medina, why would they date their calendar? And we have a continuous record of Islamic history from that time. Supposedly, was it 632? I think something like that. 622. I'm not 100% sure.
632.
632. Yeah, and. So we have a continuous record of Islamic history from that time. So why would the Muslims have cooperated in a fabrication of history, which was essentially the brainchild of, according to both Herbert Illig and Gunnar Heinsohn, the brainchild of the Frankish Ottonian dynasty, especially Otto III, around the year 1000. He essentially invented the Anno Domini calendar and invented these fictitious centuries for political and ideological reasons. Why would the Muslims have cooperated with the Frankish kings in the fabrication of history? So this is a big question, and it's a question which has never really been 100% addressed fully by any researchers. Now, aside from the phantom time theorists, there exists another huge school of thought now among conventional historians who actually accept existing chronology, that the Muhammad and the early caliphs never existed at all. Now, their arguments center mainly on linguistics and historiography, written sources, when they date. One of the arguments being that the first life of Muhammad, which we have, the first copies of the Quran, date from literally 1 or 2 or 3 centuries after the alleged life of Muhammad, and there's linguistic arguments as well. There was several writers have pointed out that the Quran, many of the surahs, many of the verses of the Quran are mysterious and make no sense. I'll give you one example. In one of the surahs, the angel Gabriel says to Mary or Miriam, "Fear not, Miriam, for a rivulet or a stream runs under thee." That's the Arabic reading. Now, if you take away the diacritical marks, which are the accent marks in Arabic, you can read the Quran ambiguously as an Aramaic text. Now, if you read it as an Aramaic text, that phrase or that surah, that verse becomes, "Fear not, Miriam, for the birth of thy child is legitimate." Now, that makes perfect sense. So this argument being, it was a German scholar proposed this, and he also proposed, for example, that the Muslim faithful are not promised 9 virgins, but they're promised 9 grapes at the heavenly banquet. So read as an Aramaic text, it's grapes or raisins, not virgins, you see. Whereas read as an Arabic text, it reads as virgins. So the point is that the Quran, the earliest version of the Quran, makes far more sense as an Aramaic text, as a Christian sect, namely the Nazarites or the Ebionites or some other related sect, had the Quran, a pre-Arabic Quran, as basically a kind of a devotional text, which was then taken up by the Arabs and turned into the Quran at some later stage and changed and read as an Arabic text, and thereby robbing the original text of a lot of its sense. So that's the arguments of that school of thought. Now, there are many of them. There are many of these writers and authors, bloggers. I mean, the internet is alive with it nowadays. Did Muhammad exist, or did the early caliphs exist? And there's a huge body of evidence developed from these people. Now, as I say, they are not followers of Gunnar Heinsohn or Herbert Liggs. They do not accept that the entire chronology of the first millennium is fictitious or is erroneous. Nonetheless, they have called into serious question from another viewpoint the historicity of the early caliphs and of Muhammad himself. So that's the two. Now, coming from the point of view of the Phantom Time people, my take on it is far more archaeological. Do the early caliphs and does Muhammad leave archaeological evidence? Because remember, early Islam is not just a religion. It's not a religion like sort of Buddhism or Christianity, which spreads gradually among the poorer classes, might take decades or even centuries to make an impact in the wider political field. Islam is, from the very beginning, according to the narrative that we have, is a religion, as an ideology it's a political religious ideology of conquest, with Muhammad himself leading the way. So Muhammad dies and the whole of the Arabian Peninsula is under the control of the Muslims. And then you have the first 4 caliphs, the rightly guided caliphs, as they're called, the Rashidun. Abu Bakr and Uthman and Umar and Ali. And they construct then an empire. They overthrow the Sasanian, Zoroastrian Persians, and then they overthrow Byzantium. They conquer Egypt. They conquer most of Anatolia. They conquer Persia as far as the Indian border, and they conquer North Africa as far as Tunisia. So by the end of the reign of these first 4 caliphs, Islam is a huge world power. It rules from the borders of India to Tunisia, which is kind of just a bit to the south of Sicily in Europe. So this is a massive empire, an incredibly powerful and wealthy empire. They've taken over some of the most populous and the most wealthy regions of the ancient world: Egypt, Alexandria, Antioch, some of the great cities of Mesopotamia. All these things are conquered by them. So this is a vastly wealthy and powerful empire, which rules an unprecedented stretch of land. And yet, and this is the point, and this is where the evidence of archaeology comes in, or rather the lack of it. These first four caliphs, neither Muhammad himself nor the first four caliphs, the Rashidun Caliphs, have left so much as a brick, an inscription, a coin to attest to their existence. There is not a trace in the archaeology of the existence of any of these people. So they rule a political empire, they rule a vast military kingdom, they are in control of some of the most wealthy and some of the most scientifically and intellectually advanced regions in the world, and they have left absolutely no visible trace of their existence. So that's the argument from the phantom time point of view, the archaeological point of view.
And I don't have a map with the year or how long it took to conquer these areas. In maximum, it's
decades, several decades, 30,
very
40,
short.
50,
Yeah,
50
very
years.
short period. And mainly in the east, like Arabia, Persia, Syria, Egypt, took far less, like a decade to 2 decades. Maybe where the Berbers in their territory took 70 years, maybe a maximum. I'm just going off the top of my head because I don't have the those particular maps, but it happened very quickly, which is kind of surprising.
These are rapid conquests, which are still a problem. The story, the narrative behind these conquests it never made sense. Some Arabs and camels came out and they conquered some of the most technologically and militarily advanced empires in the world on camels. Now, the Arab, the Islamic narrative is that this was God's favor. God showed his favor. And, some Western historians have said, well, the Byzantines and the Persians exhausted each other by some terrible wars they had fought, and they were incapable of defending themselves against these Arab nomads from the desert. But none of that makes sense. These are incredibly advanced technologically and intellectually regions. They are powerful. They are heavily populated. Some of the cities, 1 million and more inhabitants. These are vast areas. It never made sense. It never made sense. The story, the narrative that we have of the conquest of these regions. So that's another problem. It's another major issue. Now, Herbert Illig proposed a solution which I think is the most likely, and I can explain it if you in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, well, should I go on and?
Yeah, because then Illig and Hindstone have two different approaches to solve the problems, and I'm more aware of Hindstone's way of solving the issue more than Illig. But you can talk a little bit about both.
Right. Now, the wars between the Byzantine and the Sasanian or the Persian Zoroastrian Empire had gone on for a long, long time, several centuries. And finally, around the turn of the 6th, 7th century, a Persian emperor or king ascended the throne, the Sasanian throne, named Khusrau II, or Khosros, he used to be called Khusrau. In the Persian epic, the Shahnameh, the names of the Shahs, he is described as the undefeated. He is the great conqueror. And he finally, around, I think the war began with it was because of a usurpation on the Byzantine throne. I can't remember the exact details of it, but anyway, this was the casus belli, and whatever happened, Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, should we call it, and Persia again found themselves at war. The war began about 595 or something like that, 596, something like that. Anyway, after by about 614, the Persians, Khusraw's forces, were victorious. They conquered Jerusalem. The Christian inhabitants were put to the sword. Large parts of Anatolia, which is the Byzantine heartland, was now Turkey, but it was the homeland, or the heartland, shall we say, the economic and military heartland, in a way, of the Byzantine Empire. Was large parts of most of it was conquered. Many of the cities, the great cities of the region, were overthrown and burned to the ground or plundered, like Ephesus and various others. Antioch was conquered. Jerusalem was conquered. Then, in about 614, Egypt was conquered. Alexandria, and the whole of Egypt, as far then west as Cyrene, so modern Libya, fell to the Persian forces. Right, that's the narrative. And as I say, Khusraw is called in the Persian tradition the unconquered, the undefeated. Now, it is well known that both the Byzantines and the Persians at this stage employed vast numbers of Arab mercenaries. It was very similar, it was very analogous to situation to what happened in the Western Roman Empire in the final few centuries of its existence. Huge numbers of Germanic and barbarian mercenaries were employed in the Roman army until they became, in fact, the dominant force in the empire. And it was the legions, populated, as I say, mainly by barbarian mercenaries, who chose emperors. They became the kingmakers in the Western Roman Empire, and eventually they just took over. The Western Roman Empire was essentially abolished, and the Germanic kings, who were already the de facto rulers of the West, just took over and divided the Western Empire into several Germanic kingdoms, like the Frankish kingdom and the Ostrogothic kingdom, and the Visigothic kingdom in Spain, and the Vandal kingdom in North Africa. Okay. Now, Illig suggests a similar thing happened in Persia. Now, it is accepted that at some stage, Khusraw married a Christian woman. Her name was Shireen. And in fact, she was not a Christian of the Byzantine mold. She was one of the many Christian sects. Now, it is often surmised that she was a Nestorian Christian, okay? She was from Syria, Shireen. And he converted to her version of Christianity. He fell in love with this woman. It's a famous kind of a love story in Persia, in Persian tradition. Khusraw's love affair with Shireen. He adopted her version of Christianity, and that explains the massacre of the Byzantine Christians who inhabited Jerusalem. Now, the Persians at this stage, like the Byzantines, employed huge numbers of Arab mercenaries, and they had been doing so for several centuries at this stage. The Arabs had become a feature of both the Byzantine and the Persian armies, even to the extent of a controlling feature. Now, Illig suggests that, now, what happened after that? First of all, I want to explain what conventional history says happened after the fall of Jerusalem to the Persians. The cross, the sacred relics of Christianity, were captured by the Persians, okay? The true cross and various other, the nails of the cross, etc., and the crown of thorns. These were all captured and carried off in triumph into Persia. Now, the narrative accepted by historians now is that at some stage, a new Byzantine emperor arose called Heraclius. And by sheer miraculous intervention, he reconquered these regions from the Persians. He conquered Syria, he reconquered Anatolia, he reconquered Egypt, and he won back the sacred relics and brought them back to Byzantium. And the Persians were defeated. Now, the Persians do not record any of this defeat of Khusraw. They call him the undefeated. According to them, this never happened. And you can understand now. I'll leave that aside at the moment. This improbable scenario, which is now accepted in the history books, although no less a person than Gibbon was questioned the whole historicity of this reconquest by Heraclius. He says it strikes one as fictitious. Anyway, what Illig says strikes me as the most probable solution to the whole thing. At some stage, the vast numbers of Arab mercenaries in the Persian Empire organized essentially a coup d'etat, and they seized the Persian Empire. There was no reconquest of Jerusalem. There was no reconquest of Antioch, Syria. There was no reconquest of Egypt by the Byzantines. What happened was that the Arabs essentially usurped they staged essentially a vast coup d'etat, a military coup d'etat, overthrew the Persian emperors, not in the time of Khusrau, but in Khusrau's successor, Yezdegerd III. The Arabs essentially took over the Persian Empire, and the regions which then had been Persian were now under the Persian Empire. Syria, Palestine, Egypt, North Africa, Anatolia now became Arab territory, including the Persian heartland itself. Now, it's interesting that the Persian tradition, the Shahnameh, never mentions any Arab conquest of Persia. It doesn't mention anything like that. Persia was allegedly conquered by Uthman, I think it was, or Umar, one of the Rashidun, but this is not mentioned by the. Now the Arabs are mentioned, and they're called villains by the. They're described as villainous by the Persian tradition, and according to the Persian tradition, the last of the Sasanian emperors, Yezdegerd, is actually killed by a miller, not by the Arabs. In any event, what Illig suggests is that the Arabs essentially seized control of the Persian Empire, which they already de facto controlled by reason of the fact that they were the ruling element in the Persian army. And it was now an Arab empire. Now, a number of authors have suggested, why did the Arabs then invent a religion and a prophet? Why did they invent Muhammad? Why did they invent their own faith? Several authors, now I don't have several of them, some of them are described as Islamophobic, but others are just scholars, linguists, have suggested a solution which I think is a very plausible one. At this stage in world history, religion was the defining gel, I suppose, that the defining cement that cemented an empire together. Byzantium was defined as a Christian empire, a particular branch, particular type of Christianity. The Sasanians were defined by their religion, which was Zoroastrianism. That was the cement which bound their empire and their entire region under their control together. So the Arabs now find themselves in control of an empire. But how to secure it, how to make it an Arab empire and not just a version of the Byzantines or a version of the Persians or the Zoroastrians. So you have to have an Arab religion. You have to have an Arab prophet. Now, it's been pointed out that the name Muhammad was found there was a Jewish kingdom in southern Yemen in the 4th and 5th century, and it waged war against Byzantium. And one of the kings of this region who defeated the Byzantines minted a coin with the name MHMED on it, Muhammad, okay? Meaning the praised one, okay? And it seems that the term Muhammad was actually used for Jesus and various other claimants to the title of the Messiah over the previous few centuries. So the idea that there was a Muhammad, that Muhammad, this praised one, was the prophesied Messiah, was a thing that had been doing the rounds of the Arabian Peninsula for several centuries before this. Now, the first, I need to go on to the coinage, the early Islamic coinage, because the early Islamic coinage does not show what we would expect it to show. Quite the opposite. What it actually shows is that what we call Islam did not exist at this stage. Now, the first Islamic coins are direct copies, allegedly, of the Persian Zoroastrian coinage. So it shows the image of the Persian emperor, either Khusrau or his successor Yezdegerd. And on the reverse side, a Zoroastrian fire temple. Now, next to that written is the Arabic term, or the Aramaic term, Bism Allah, in the name of Allah. And that's what identifies this allegedly as an Islamic coin. Okay? But remember, if Khusrau had converted to a Syriac version of Christianity, then the idea of in the name of Allah and the name of God would written on one of his coins wouldn't be out of place. So the argument is that he had been converted to a branch of Christianity which was almost like a proto-Islam. It was like maybe the Ebionite religion or the Nazarite. No, the Ebionites or the Nazarites were the Jewish version of Christianity in a sense, okay? They believed in holding on to the Mosaic law and the rites of circumcision, etc., and food that was clean and unclean, kosher or halal food, as it's called in Islam. So if Khusrau, the Persian king Khusrau, had converted to this form of Christianity, it wouldn't have been out of place that he would have minted coins with the term, an Aramaic term on it, which sounded very Arabic, in the name of Allah, in the name of God. Okay, now, or it may have been, by this stage already a proto-Islam, absolutely associated with his Arab mercenaries. Okay, maybe it was a form of Christianity or proto-Islam, which we might call it, which had become the dominant religion in Arabia by this stage. So the argument is that these coins were not minted by the early caliphs. They weren't minted by the Rashidun Caliphs, as is now claimed, but they were actually minted by the Persian kings themselves, who had at this stage converted to a form of Christianity which we could call proto-Islam. Now, after those coins disappear, the first coin with the name Muhammad on it is minted by the first Umayyad Caliph. Now, the Umayyad Caliphate comes after the Rashidun, okay? So Muawiyah is the first of the Umayyad Caliphs, and he issues the first coin with the name Muhammad appearing on it. But these coins are intensely controversial. Could you show an image of them?
Yeah, I don't know if I have the
Oh, you do have
Umayyad.
them.
Okay,
You
hold
do.
on.
You
I've
do
been
have them
flipping
there.
back and forth. Go ahead, Emmett. Yep.
You do
This is
have
the
Muawiyah's coin.
Sasanian right here, which shows the fire altar.
Right. Go to the. You had one up there. That's not it. You had Muawiyah. Yeah, here. Now Muawiyah allegedly. The name Muhammad, or MHMed, is written on this. This is a coin of the first Umayyad Caliph Muawiyah. Okay, but he is holding this figure. First of all, there's a number of things here which are completely un-Islamic. He's a figure. There's a figural portrayal in the first point of a prophet allegedly, because the name Muhammad is appearing on this, and he's holding a cross. Right now, the cross is in Islam is an anti-symbol. Is a symbol of a lie. Is a symbol of evil. Right. So whatever Muawiyah was, the first Umayyad Caliph, he was not a Muslim as we understand it in any shape or form. So these are intensely. So Muawiyah overthrows the last of the Rashidun Caliphs, Ali, and seizes control. Now Ali is based, of course. Ali is the great hero of the Shia Muslims of Persia, no less. Okay. And Muawiyah is based in Damascus, so he's Arabic to the core, and he overthrows Ali, and he mints these coins now, which no longer look Persian, but are certainly not Islamic in any sense that we understand. And in his coins, for the first time, appeared the name Muhammad. Okay, now it's not clear if the figure holding the cross is Muhammad, or if it's Muawiyah himself, but it seems like it's Muhammad. Now, if this is the case and he's holding a cross, then this would suggest that the praised one being portrayed here is Jesus, okay, is Christ, not the prophet of Islam as we come to know him. Now, it is after Muawiyah's death, a few decades later, we have another Umayyad Caliph called Abd al-Malik, and he is the first to mint coins that we would recognize as Islamic coins. There's no figural portrayal. There's just some calligraphic words in Arabic from the Quran, and that's it. Now, this is a long time after Muhammad's death. This is a long time after the Umayyad Caliphate. And here we have what we might call recognizably Islamic coin for the first time, minted by this guy, Abd al-Malik. Okay. Now, the argument put forward by Illig and several others is that the process of Arabization, of the creation of a separate prophet of Islam called Muhammad, an Arab prophet, specifically an Arab prophet, began with Muawiyah, the first Umayyad Caliph. It was Muawiyah who staged the coup d'etat against the Persians, right? So he was the leader of the Arab armies. He overthrew his Persian masters, Yezdegerd, and seized control essentially of the Persian Empire, which now became an Arab empire. So he began the process then of the creation of the story of an Arab prophet. He didn't immediately change the whole religion from this proto-Islam, this Christian proto-Islam, which he himself followed and which the Persian kings had followed. But the whole process began then, and it was a gradual evolution. And finally, about 3 or 4 decades later, Abd al-Malik goes the whole hog, completely formulates a new religion where Muhammad is no longer a name, an honorary title, the praised one. It's no longer the honorary title for Jesus or some of the other claimants to the Messiah's title. It is an Arab prophet who lives in the heart of Arabia, which is Mecca. Now, the archaeology suggests that the first Islam had nothing to do with Mecca. The Meccan region shows no sign of any importance, even as an inhabited center. The early Islam, the earliest versions of Islam, the earliest Islamic archaeology shows a focus on Jordan and Syria. Okay, and that the belief in this prophet, this Muhammad, this praised one, the belief was that he inhabited that region. In other words, the regions around Israel, around Palestine. Okay, so Petra, for example, is associated with the earliest mosques. And in fact, the earliest mosques are orientated towards that region, not towards Mecca. So it's only under Abd al-Malik that a separate prophet named Muhammad, an Arab prophet, who comes from the heart of Arabia. And the argument is then that this is an entirely fabricated story in order to, as I say, forge this idea that there was an Arab prophet, that this is an Arab religion, this is the gel, this is the cement, which is going to bind this new empire, which they find themselves in control. It's going to bind it together, it's going to solidify it, and it's going to make it secure. So that is the essential argument. It was Islam was a gradual creation for political, ideological reasons, power reasons, and that it took, actually quite a long time to formulate the religion, to formulate the holy book, to mold it. It was a gradual evolution, and the hadiths, which were used then there were thousands of them, and these were created and edited and repeatedly again and again and again until an acceptable narrative was arrived at. Could you just hold on a minute till I turn on the heater? I'm actually freezing here.
Okay.
This is ice cold Ireland, as the ice cold Hibernia, as the Romans called it.
While we take the hiatus, I'm just looking at the chat. We have a few comments, no questions. If anybody would like to ask a question, we don't have a super chat yet. The channel's still growing, but definitely ask some questions, because I have some questions. Then when would Illig, because I definitely say century 6 and 9 have a complete lack of archaeology, almost totally.
Yeah.
Christianity is not spreading. You can only show Christianity as a spread in the West, especially after the 10th century.
Yes.
The Crusades then, because I've always wondered, why did Christian Crusaders wait 1,000 years after Christ, essentially, to reclaim Jerusalem? So then, according to Illig's way of looking at it, when did Islam actually start to rise? And then would that explain why the Crusades happened, essentially 1,000 years after Christ, or a little more?
Yeah. The Crusades are the Western response to the early spread of Islam. They didn't take 5 centuries to. This response did not take, according to Illig, 5 centuries to materialize. The response materialized within a century of the rapid spread of this Islamic faith and the conquests. There's another point I have to. The Vikings are coming to the whole Viking age, and the Viking expansion comes into this. And according to accepted chronology, the Vikings arose. The Viking expansion only begins about the late 8th, 9th century. And the Swedish Vikings, the Eastern Vikings, sail through the Russian rivers, the Volga, etc., the Dnieper, and they capture Slavs. Our word slave comes from this word Slav. They capture Slavic peasants, and they sell them. They ship them down the Volga and the Dnieper, across the Black Sea and across the Caspian Sea, into the Caliphate. Okay, and they begin trading. And this Islamic gold begins to appear in Scandinavian archaeology. But here's the great puzzle. Hordes of Sasanian coins, early Islamic allegedly, but still Sasanian style coins, appear in Scandinavia and have been found all over Scandinavia. So coins, hordes of coins with the image of Khusrau and Yazdegerd on them. Okay. Now, we have to accept then that the Arabs were trading these Slavic slaves off the Vikings with coins that were already several centuries. But remember, Khusrau's and his coins are from the late 6th, early 7th century, whereas the Vikings don't begin expanding until the 9th, 10th century. So these people are trading with coins for several centuries old. They're trading for with the Vikings for slaves, and they're giving the Vikings as payment these coins, which are already many centuries old. And these are then appearing in Scandinavia and throughout Russia. There's a Viking Age settlement called Starya Ladoga next to Lake Ladoga. And it's even accepted by conventional historians that this is a far earlier example of Viking Age expansion, going back to the 7th or 8th century, which is contrary to all other Viking archaeology. So there are major problems here for this. Why are the Arabs using centuries-old coins? Where are they getting these coins out of to trade with the Vikings in exchange for Slavic slaves? Now, if you go to the other side of the Arab world, you go to Spain. You get this duplication and triplication of characters in the 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th centuries. So, the Arabs allegedly conquer Spain around 715, 720. And there's an Abd ar-Rahman is the first Caliph, Cordoban Caliph of that region, or Emir, should I say. And he begins work on the great mosque at Cordoba, which is actually the St. Vincent Cathedral, partially demolished and converted into a mosque. So he begins the work on the converting of this cathedral into a mosque. But no trace, or virtually no trace, of his work has been found. Then, a century later, Abd ar-Rahman II continues work on the mosque in Cordoba. And a century later, Abd ar-Rahman III completes the work on the conversion of the cathedral in Cordoba into the great mosque of Cordoba. Now, finally, then, we have the archaeological evidence. Abd ar-Rahman has left very abundant evidence of his work and his existence. But the earlier Abd ar-Rahmans 1 and 2, who have incidentally the same father and the name of their father and the name of their sons are all the same. They're duplicates, right? So Abd ar-Rahman I has a father, I can't remember his name, but it's the same name as the father of Abd ar-Rahman II, and it's the same name as the father of Abd ar-Rahman III, and the same with their sons. So these are duplicate characters. And the other thing is that from the archaeology of Spain, so Spain is supposedly during these centuries from the 720s till about 1000, it's supposed to be a huge, powerful and wealthy caliphate. The archaeologists have found virtually nothing from those 3 centuries. But suddenly around, the late 10th century, from about 980, from the time of Abd ar-Rahman III, suddenly they're finding an abundance of rich archaeology of this Islamic emirate in Spain. But from the 2.5 centuries before that, there's absolutely nothing. There's virtually no, there's a few bricks and walls which are maybe and possibly connected with Abdar, but there's nothing concrete at all. Okay, so everywhere we look, there are these very grave hiatuses. There are these absence. I know people say that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, but sometimes it's like in a murder case. Sometimes the evidence is circumstantial, but there reaches a point where it becomes so overwhelming that you have to say, well, okay, in this case, absence of evidence, it could possibly be evidence of absence.
Right. I think it was Jan Buford, who also wrote alongside of Hindsohn and speaks on these issues, talks about historians using the sources, which we don't disannul, but they are indeed secondary sources. They are not primary sources to any of this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and it
This
becomes
is a big
more of a thing
problem.
where the secondary sources override the archaeological evidence, and then the archaeologists are literally placating, I hate to use the term, placating to the historians to try to either fit archaeology into the established chronology or not. But when there's an absence, they rely just on the written sources, and that becomes the
Yep.
conundrum, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I find that again and again reading about these centuries. It's all written documentation, but and then suddenly they get to the 10th or 11th century, and suddenly they're showing pictures of castles and archaeology. Before that, it's just documents. As the Germans have a saying, the paper is patient. Papier is geduldig. Paper is patient. It will take anything. You can write whatever you want. You can create your history. You can create your mythology. You can create anything on a piece of paper, you know. But if there's no archaeology there, what do we do? You know,
Right.
this is a big problem.
Was
Go ahead,
was there
Jacob.
a proto Muhammad in the Aramaic Quran that you were mentioning earlier, or was
Yeah.
that an addition?
Muhammad in the Aramaic text is actually a title for Jesus. Remember, this is a Christian sect. No, I think it has been associated with the Nestorians, but it could also have been the sacred book of the Electory of the Ebionites. It's possible either of them, or some forgotten other sect, which then just became absorbed into Islam. The Quran is full of incredible ahistorical and ridiculous. I mean, for example, in the Quran, Isa or Jesus is the nephew of Aaron, Moses' brother Aaron. He's only 2 generations away from Moses. This is yeah. Now you would say, well, how did they get away with this? Well, when you're in the days before universal literacy, you can write whatever you want. Nobody knows anything about the past. Nobody's even very much interested or cares very much. I'm also reminded of these guys. There's a couple of guys on the internet that do these interviews with people in cities like New York and all this kind of stuff, and they ask people these most ridiculously easy questions. Who fought in the Korean War, or where was it fought? And people can't answer the questions. Some of the most ridiculously easy questions. And this is after 2 centuries of compulsory education of a body of knowledge which we call history, which is an agreed framework and chronology, where there's an internet, where the information is available to everybody, and people still don't know. Now, how much more easy was it in the past when nobody could read and write, when nobody was educated, nobody knew anything? There was no such thing as history in the past. History is a thing that was formulated essentially in Europe after the Renaissance, where they tried to get an exact chronology and formulate and coordinate all the different countries and bring them together and synchronize them and all this kind of stuff. Before that, there was just people had legends and they had traditions, they had stories about the past. They knew nothing. Maybe they'd heard of a name. And as I say, even nowadays, you go into any street in any city and you ask reasonably well-educated people, like, what do you know about Alexander the Great? What do you know about Julius Caesar? Oh, was he a Roman? Or was he a Roman emperor? Or when did he live? 100 years ago. people have no idea. And as I say, this is after 1.5 to 2 centuries of compulsory mass education. And how much more easy in the past when nobody knew anything. So then you could have a Jesus who is the nephew of Aaron, and you could put them together and nobody would complain because nobody knew.
Yeah. School curriculums have changed a lot in the United States. 13 years after I graduated high school, they weren't learning about the things that I was learning about, 13 years prior. So
Yeah,
I see those videos you're talking about, and people just completely clueless as to um, the
it's
world history.
actually
They
very
focus
funny.
a lot more on American history now here in the
Yeah,
United States more than
yeah,
anything. They zip past, world cultures and world history quickly as possible just to get to about the last 300 to 400 years of American history. So that becomes a bit of an issue.
yeah.
I'm going to put up a comment that was made by one of our viewers. Russell Shute says, problem, ice core data shows an alignment of our chronology with silver production in Roman history. I don't know if
Hmm. Hmm.
that means much. It could mean much. I mean, something. Emmett,
It
any
means
comments
nothing.
about it?
Could I explain that?
Go ahead.
Ice cores, the idea that uh, ice cores can be used as an accurate chronological measuring rod is one of those. It's one of the sacred cows of modern chronology, which has no basis in fact. People imagine that you go to Greenland and you go through the ice and there are these rings like tree rings. That's not what it's like at all. What there are is a series of there's a look what would look like a solid wall of ice to you or me, and they're measuring various gases and different parts and of the ice, and they're determining, oh, this is one year, and that's another year, and that's another year. It wasn't like that. First of all, the rate of the accumulation of ice is being vastly underestimated. A squadron of American fighters or bombers during the Second World War landed in Greenland. They landed in the ice cap. Now, it was expected because of the accepted chronology or alleged scientific data on the accumulation of ice. It was expected. So there was a recovery attempt on this squadron in the 1990s. So it's about 50 years after they had landed in Greenland. It was expected they'd be about 2 or 3 feet under the ice. In fact, they were 200 feet under the ice. So the ice was accumulating about 10 times the rate that the scientists, the so-called experts, were claiming. So ice core data is like radiocarbon. It's a sacred cow. It's based on a series of assumptions which have never been seriously tested by anybody because it's not in anybody's interest to test these things. But these are ridiculous. It does make sense. And it has been used again and again for this purpose, and it's completely inappropriate.
Yep, got you. Yeah, I don't know if that would justify or realign silver making. We know people were using silver a lot more than gold, at least at that point in time. That leads to another argument, and
Mm-hmm.
that's a scientific argument where
Yeah,
it's expected that heavy metals, within the sun itself or deep within the core of the sun, well, then why is gold and things like silver near the surface of our planet in the abundance that it's in? And, that's enough. That's
exactly.
a whole nother argument because it would
Absolutely.
be expected for heavy metals like gold and even
Yeah,
silver to be further down within the earth, closer to the core. That's
absolutely.
a whole nother rabbit hole. Here's more of a comment here by Stephen Bennett. The Ishmaelite theory is that Persian Jews converted Arabs by claiming they were descents from Ishmael, but many were also Christian. Islam blended these two factions. Um, and that, because I've read a little bit
Yeah,
about the crosses um, being more synonymous cross culturally, at least at that period of time, for what they represented.
yeah,
I don't know too much more than just what I've kind of glanced at. I
yeah.
didn't do extensive research, but go ahead. You want to make a comment about that, Emmett? Possibly.
No, that's an entirely plausible explanation. But as I say, remember the truth about this whole period is incredibly fluid because what has been shown by the lack of any archaeology is that the narrative that we have is almost certainly untrue and certainly almost certainly fictitious. So yeah, all kinds of different elements and ideologies could have come together and been blended together by the Arabs at that time. It's entirely possible.
So then my question, I guess, would be dealing with the Aramaic Quran. We know that the Nabateans in Petra, that was their script.
Yeah.
How does that work then with the realignment? Because I know Heinsohn had his way of looking at it is that there's a gap between the Nabateans and of about 600 to 700 years with Arabic writing and things of that nature. So
Yeah.
again, with the way Illig looks at it, even versus Heinsohn, how does it look to realign? You know, even from Heinsohn's perspective, let's just kind of go that way for a minute or two, just to talk about it. His way of
Well,
looking.
it's again, you know, it's a question that really needs to be properly examined. But you know, Heinsohn is making a very valid point there, that there's this huge yawning gap between one version of the one script used for writing the Arabic language and the accepted Arabic script, which doesn't appear for many centuries later. But remember, the actual Arabic script that we have is nowhere actually really attested before about the 10th century. The Arabic script, to be intelligible, to actually read it properly as Arabic, has these what we call diacritical marks or accents, you know, which in French would be called the acute and the grave and the circumflex, etc. These are the marks that make each word differentiate one letter from another and make it intelligible. So these don't really appear in any Arab text until about the 10th century. Okay, so yeah, there's a yawning gap between the Nabatean script, which is used to write the Arabic language, and the accepted Arabic script, and which has to be examined. And you know, Heinsohn was drawn attention to a very, very real problem, which again, you know, these have tended to be swept under the carpet because there has been a general reluctance on the part of many scholars to question Islam for somewhat obvious reasons. So the people have tended to shy away from many of these questions in the past, but more and more of them are now being openly addressed. And you know, it's beginning to look like the whole narrative that we have and has been accepted is a huge fabrication, both on the part of the Byzantines, on the part of the Western Empire, and the part of the Arabs, each fabricating a history for their own particular reasons. The Byzantines would certainly have wanted to rewrite the history of their humiliation at the hands of the Persians when they lost the sacred relics, you know, the true cross and all this, and they would certainly have been motivated to invent a reconquest from the Persians and a repossession. So obviously, after the loss of these things, a series of relics appeared in Constantinople, which the Byzantines claimed were the original relics. So they had to invent a narrative of how they got them back. So it's just we reconquered them from the Persians, but you know, it was a fictitious construct as well. So there were various motivations for, you know, political and ideological motivations for fabricating history, both in the West and in the East. And you know, things are no different nowadays. You know, history's still being fabricated in a way, not maybe as blatantly in terms of chronology, in terms of massive events. Yet there is, you know, as Winston Churchill said one time famously, he says, "History will be kind to me," he says, "because I'm going to write it myself." You know, so
Yeah.
the winners write the books, you know, and you know they write the narrative, and everybody else, you know, you can you can question it maybe 1,000 years later or whatever, you know. As a, I don't know, it's not relevant, but it just brought to mind there a scene from Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark when the evil German guy locked Indiana Jones inside the temple at Tanis, and he says, "Dr. Jones," he says, "you're about to become a part of this archaeological site." He says, "Who knows? Even in 1,000 years, you might be worth something." So I thought that was quite funny. Yeah.
So with the realignment, would this help further explain why the Islamic Renaissance, and we talked about Alhambra Castle, and it was mentioned by a Gnostic informant on a modern day debate video. Neil, I forget Neil's last name. Jacob knows him personally. Versus the Christian Renaissance, which took place more or less in the 17th century.
Senlak's last name.
Say it one more time. I'm sorry. Senelak, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And that was very intriguing because Alhambra is dated around 1238 in its completion, the 13th century. And then you don't have an explosion of a Christian Renaissance till after the Renaissance, essentially. And where you have churches springing up and new architecture.
Well, no, that's not quite. I mean, the Gothic architecture, which is, I mean, if you've ever been inside a Gothic cathedral like Notre Dame or Chartres or something, these are stunning pieces of art and architecture, and they're certainly easily comparable to the Alhambra, and they're contemporary with the Alhambra, you know. Okay. So we're talking about a simultaneous explosion of art and architecture in both the Islamic and in the Christian world in the 12th, 13th centuries, you know.
Right. And not to kind of veer and steer off, but we did talk about how then these the Muslims past the 10th century were acquiring weapons and things of that nature from Europeans that were divided at the time until Europe kind of came together more or less, or still sort of came together to start the Renaissance and move forward beyond that. Like, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, the idea that these were kind of a dark and dead centuries. Well, certainly the questionable centuries are dark and dead because they didn't exist. But from certainly the late 10th century, there's evidence of massive technological and economic development in Europe. So there are huge numbers of vital technologies arrive in Europe from China, especially. You know, famously the compass and gunpowder and a whole range of things. Paper making, silk making, etc., etc. The double-masted sails and ships for sailing, tacking into the wind. The stirrup, new forms of steel production, new metallurgical technologies, new forms of architecture, the flying buttress for the great cathedrals, the pointed arch, etc., etc. Spectacles, the magnifying lens appears in Italy in the 12th century, 13th century. Mechanical clocks appear at this time. The idea that these are moribund centuries is a bit of a myth. These were actually very, very economically and scientifically dynamic centuries. So long before what we consider the Renaissance, you know, the English and the French are fighting each other with cannons and gunpowder at Agincourt and places like that. So they're using advanced technology, which is a way beyond anything the Romans knew. They're already far. Now, they don't have the military, they don't have the organizational tightness of the Roman Empire, but they're technologically way ahead of anything that the Romans knew by this stage. So there are major technological advancements at this time, even long before the Renaissance proper begins in the 15th century. So Europe is, the Silk Road is highly operational, and, you know, ideas are been brought back and forth across this from China to the West and from the West to China. So it's an era of unprecedented technical development. Actually, very, very rapid technical development. So there are a whole series of myths about this era which have been perpetrated. The idea that before Columbus, people believed the Earth was flat. That was Washington Irving that invented that. It's utter nonsense, of course. It turns out Columbus's idea about the size of the Earth was absurdly wrong. He thought that Eratosthenes, the Greek, had got it wrong, that he had overestimated the size of the Earth. And he thought that I could get to China, I can get to the Indies by sailing west inside a few weeks. Whereas according to Eratosthenes, who calculated the size of the Earth, the circumference of the Earth, famously using a well in Egypt, and he got it right. Actually, Eratosthenes was correct down to a few miles. But Columbus famously thought he was wrong, and he thought I can get to the Indies by sailing west within a few weeks. We'll be all right. And of course, he was devastatingly wrong. But lucky for him, there was a huge continent in between the Pacific and the Atlantic Oceans, which he kind of bumped into. But no, the Europeans were perfectly aware of the size of the world and that it was a sphere, etc.
I'm gonna take one more comment, and we can kind of end it here because it'll lead into another episode that Emmet and I had talked about some time ago. But this is also from Russell Shute. It says Hindstone uses 35,000 Roman archaeological sites without strata to match history. 700-year air ice core or Roman silver production records should be easy to locate. I'll make the first comment that he uses. There's about 2,500 sites in Rome. I want to say 35,000 is throughout Europe, all the way practically into Israel. But the totality is 35,000. But Rome is a separate animal. And there's an underground of Rome. That's something that me and Emmet want to talk about. Rome has strata beneath the city itself, and we know it's there. And that is something very, very key to talk about. Would you like to comment on this first, Emmet? I kind of hear people talking about this on other podcasts, but 35,000 archaeological sites throughout the first millennium. It's not just in Rome. Rome has about 2,500, I want to say. But go ahead, Emmet.
Yeah, I mean, what Heinsohn says essentially is that all the historical epochs recognized in the books, in the written literature, are not represented in any archaeological site that has ever been dug up. There's always a few of them, but there's always missing strata. And that is correct. He's absolutely right there. There is not a single site that can show early imperial Rome up to the 3rd century, late imperial Rome, early Merovingians, late Merovingians, Carolingians, say in France, for example, Carolingians in the 8th and 9th century, and then late Carolingians and Franks, etc. later. There's not a single site can give us a complete stratigraphy of all the textbook. All the stages occurring in the textbook cannot be shown in any single archaeological site. And again, that is a major issue that mainstream scholarship refuses to look at so far. But it will have to be looked at eventually. There's clearly a major problem there.
There's some sites that me and Emmet have talked about privately, like the San Clemente church in Rome. That's very intriguing. There are quite a few underground sites in Rome that are usually dated between 1 BC and 1 AD typically, but then you can find strata on top of the older strata. But then we would still agree here that by the 6th century, then that's where the main bulk of the problem has always been. That has been the problem since I was, 40 years ago in high school talking about this stuff. But that's always been the conundrum. 6 to 9 has really been the issue. And some would stretch it farther than that, but it's still 6 to 9 is the main bulk of the problem. But we can talk about that in a later episode because there's more to talk about when it comes to all this. And again, we're here to not dismiss, mainstream versus alternative or any other alternative viewpoints. We're here to just do an investigation and talk about it where, a lot of mainstream, I hate to use the word mainstream, but mainstream scholars don't talk about either in Europe or in the United States. A lot of this is frowned upon, that you just take what's accepted and move and go with it essentially. But here we just do an investigation into some of the controversial issues about the past, and especially with chronology. Jacob, you have anything else to add to the conversation?
No, I do not.
Yeah, I thought it was good. One little tidbit, because it's very hard to get these coins. I want the listeners and audience to understand that with the Bismillah on the coins, you have to do some deep digging. But we do see after like the 9th century that Arabic writing does become more prevalent on coins, and there's pretty much just writing on coins. You can actually see that. I didn't put it all out there, but it's very difficult to find the coins to begin with. It's not an easy search. You have to really pull from peer-reviewed papers and coin collectors. Essentially, it's not easy. Some coins have the Bismillah writing, some coins don't. Some coins are replicas and duplicates. Some coins are original. Either way, it wasn't very easy to get those few coins that I actually found. Wikipedia was one source. Then I used some other sources from some peer-reviewed papers, but it was difficult. It wasn't very easy to find that. I just want the viewers to understand that. And again, I'd like to thank Emmet and Jacob for joining us today. This is a very controversial subject. Hopefully it'll clear some things up for some people and cause them to do a little bit more research in the areas of chronology of the first millennium. With that, I don't think we have an outro, do we, Jacob? I just kind of can end the stream.
I think I'm gonna create a new outro for the channel.
Yeah, and I want Jacob for setting this all up. Jacob set this up more than a year ago, I guess, just as an outlet for alternative ideas and
like 2023.
2023, yeah.
So
again, I'd like to thank Jacob for that. And with that, I have really nothing else to say. I thought it was a good show. Thanks again, Emmet, for coming on, and we'll plan some other episodes in the future.
Thank you very much, both of you. Speak later.
Thanks.